A father and son died on the exact same date, 13 years apart, on the same project. A woman survived 3 separate shipwrecks across 4 years on 3 different ships. A man was shot, lived, and then killed 20 years later by the same bullet, the one that had been sitting inside a tree the whole time, waiting. None of these are myths or legends. Every story in this video is verified, documented, and in some cases still has no rational explanation. These are 12 moments where coincidence stopped being the right word. Number 1. The Hoover Dam. J.G. Tierney was a surveyor working along the Colorado River when he fell in and drowned on December 20th, 1922. His name was entered into the official record as the first fatality of the Hoover Dam project. Work continued for 13 years. The dam was finished in 1935. The project formally closed, and construction wrapped up for good. The last worker killed during construction died on December 20th, 1935, 13 years to the exact day. His name was Patrick Tierney. He was J.G. Tierney's son. The first death and the last death of the entire Hoover Dam project. Same date, different decades, father and son. Whatever you make of that, it sets the tone for everything that follows. Number 2. The bullet that waited 20 years. In 1883, Henry Ziegland ended a relationship with a young woman in Honey Grove, Texas. She took her own life shortly afterward. Her brother blamed Ziegland entirely, tracked him down, and shot him at close range. Believing he had killed his target, the brother turned the gun on himself and died. But the bullet had only grazed Ziegland's face. It traveled forward and buried itself deep in the trunk of a large tree at the edge of his property, and Ziegland walked away, wounded, but alive. 20 years passed. In 1903, Ziegland decided to clear the old tree from his yard. It was wide and deeply rooted, and cutting it by hand was more effort than it was worth, so he packed the base with dynamite and set off the charge. The explosion drove the old bullet out of the trunk with enough velocity to cover the distance to where Ziegland was standing. It struck him in the head and killed him. The bullet that had failed to kill him in 1883 had waited 20 years and finished the job. Number 3. The woman the ocean couldn't kill. Violet Jessop was 23 years old when she survived her first shipwreck. In September 1911, she was working as a stewardess aboard the RMS Olympic when it collided with the HMS Hawke off the coast of England. The collision tore a large hole in the hull, but the ship stayed afloat, and Violet came away without injury. Less than a year later, she was assigned to the maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic. When the Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank, Violet made it into a lifeboat. She was one of approximately 710 survivors out of more than 2,200 people on board. 4 years after that, in November 1916, she was serving on the HMHS Britannic, an Olympic-class vessel converted into a hospital ship during the First World War. The Britannic struck an underwater mine in the Aegean Sea and sank in under an hour. Violet jumped from the ship before it went under, was pulled beneath the surface by the suction of the sinking hull, and came back up. She was rescued. 3 ships from the same class. 3 separate disasters across 4 years. She survived every single one and continued working at sea until 1950. Number 4. The twins. In February 2002, a 70-year-old man was struck and killed by a truck while riding his bicycle along a rural road near the town of Rai in northern Finland. Police documented the scene, cleared the road, and moved on. 2 hours later, on the same stretch of road, a second 70-year-old man riding a bicycle was struck and killed by a truck traveling in the same direction. Same road, same type of vehicle, same direction, same outcome, 2 hours apart. When investigators looked more closely at the 2 men, they found the connection. They were identical twins. They had not been traveling together that morning and had no knowledge of each other's plans. The first brother had been dead for 2 hours before the second one even set out on his bicycle. Local police described it as a coincidence. Nobody offered a better explanation, and none has been given since. Number 5. James Dean's car. James Dean was 24 years old when his Porsche 911 Spider collided with another car on California State Route 46 in September 1955. The wreckage was recovered and eventually sold for parts, its components sent to different buyers. What followed is harder to account for. A mechanic who received the salvaged engine had it slip during installation and crush both of his legs. A racing driver who purchased the car's repaired tires had both of them blow out simultaneously during a race and was thrown from the track. In 1959, the remaining body sections were loaded onto a flatbed truck for a safety exhibition in Oregon. The truck veered off the road en route, and the driver was injured. The following year, the car's chassis was shipped to another exhibition by truck. The truck arrived at its destination. The chassis was not on it. No investigation produced a clear answer. The wreckage of James Dean's Porsche has not been officially located or accounted for since 1960. Number 6. Lincoln and Kennedy. This one takes a few minutes because the list keeps going. Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. John F. Kennedy was elected exactly 100 years later, in 1960. Lincoln was born in 1809. Kennedy was born in 1909. Both were shot on a Friday, seated beside their wives. Both were succeeded by vice presidents named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who followed Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who followed Kennedy, was born in 1908, 100 years apart to the year. Lincoln had a personal secretary whose last name was Kennedy. Historical accounts suggest she warned him not to go to the theater on the evening of April 14, 1865. Kennedy had a personal secretary whose last name was Lincoln. She reportedly warned him not to travel to Dallas in November 1963. Neither man listened. Both assassins were shot dead before they could stand trial. John Wilkes Booth was killed 12 days after the assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald was shot 2 days after his arrest. Both men were Southerners in their mid-20s. Lincoln was shot inside a theater, and Booth was later cornered in a warehouse. Kennedy was shot from a building overlooking a street, and Oswald was arrested inside a movie theater. If you sat down and tried to construct this list of connections deliberately, working backward from both men's lives, you almost certainly couldn't do it. Number 7. 7 lightning strikes. Roy Sullivan was a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. Between 1942 and 1977, he was struck by lightning 7 separate times and survived every one. The first strike burned off his big toenail. The second knocked him unconscious and singed his eyebrows. The third burned his left shoulder. The fourth set his hair on fire. The fifth set his hair on fire again and burned his legs. The sixth injured his ankle. The seventh put him in the hospital with chest and stomach burns. The Guinness Book of World Records recognized him as the person struck by lightning more times than any other individual in documented history. The statistical odds of being struck by lightning once in a lifetime are roughly 1 in 15,000. Sullivan told journalists he had begun to believe lightning was specifically following him, and it is genuinely difficult to argue with him. He started carrying a can of water during storms in case his hair caught fire again. He died in 1983 from an unrelated cause. Number 8. The Tomb. In June 1941, Soviet archaeologists opened the tomb of Timur, the 14th century conqueror known in the West as Tamerlane, at the Gur-e-Amir Mausoleum in Samarkand. Before the tomb was unsealed, local elders presented the team with an old manuscript said to contain a warning. Whoever disturbed the remains would release upon the world an invader more terrible than Timur himself. The archaeologists documented the warning and proceeded. The tomb was opened on June 21, 1941. The following morning, June 22nd, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military land invasion in recorded history, with more than 3 million troops advancing across a front nearly 1,800 miles wide. The Soviet Union sustained more military and civilian casualties in the years that followed than any other nation in the war. Tamerlane's remains were returned to the mausoleum and reinterred with full Islamic burial rites in November 1942, 2 months before the Soviet victory at Stalingrad. Number 9. The Book on the Bench. In the early 1970s, British actor Anthony Hopkins was cast in a film adaptation of a novel called The Girl from Petrovka, written by George Pfeiffer. Hopkins searched several London bookshops for a copy to read before filming began and found none available anywhere. Passing through Leicester Square Underground station on his way home, he noticed a book left on a bench on the platform and picked it up. It was a copy of The Girl from Petrovka. Months later, on set, Hopkins met Pfeiffer in person for the first time. Pfeiffer mentioned in passing that he no longer owned his personal copy of the novel. He had lent his own annotated copy to a friend in London, he explained, and the friend had lost it somewhere in the city. Hopkins retrieved the copy he had found at Leicester Square and showed it to Pfeiffer. The margins were filled with Pfeiffer's handwritten notes. It was his copy, the exact one, turned up on a bench in an underground station. Number 10. The doctor who died to prove his point. Ignaz Semmelweis was a Hungarian physician working in Vienna when he discovered that doctors were killing their patients. He observed that women in maternity wards staffed by physicians died from post-delivery infection at dramatically higher rates than women in adjacent wards attended by midwives. He concluded that physicians were carrying something lethal from dissection rooms to delivery rooms on their unwashed hands. He introduced a mandatory hand-washing protocol using a chlorinated lime solution, and the mortality rate in his ward fell immediately and sharply. The medical establishment rejected his findings outright. Colleagues disputed his methods and resisted the implication that physicians bore direct responsibility for patient deaths. Semmelweis was removed from his position. In 1865, colleagues arranged his involuntary admission to a mental asylum. He died there within 2 weeks of arrival. The cause of death recorded in the institution's documents was a septic infection, specifically a wound on his hand that had become severely infected. The physician who proved that unwashed hands spread fatal infection died from an infected hand. He was 47 years old. Number 11. The Triplets. In the autumn of 1980, Bobby Shafran arrived for his first day at Sullivan County Community College in New York and was immediately surrounded by students greeting him by a different name, treating him like someone they already knew well. A student named Michael Dominitz understood what was happening. His close friend Eddie Galland had attended the same college the previous year before transferring, and looking at Bobby Shafran, he was looking at Eddie Galland's face. The two young men met. They were identical twins, separated at birth, adopted by different families, with no knowledge of each other's existence. Newspapers ran the story. A third young man named David Kellman saw the coverage and recognized both of their faces as his own. They were identical triplets, born July 12, 1961, and deliberately separated within weeks of birth by an adoption agency as part of an undisclosed psychological study examining the influence of environment on genetically identical individuals raised apart. No family was ever told. The study was never published in full. The researchers made no contact with the brothers at any point during or after the experiment. Eddie Galland died in 1995. Bobby Shafran and David Kellman spent decades trying to have the complete records released. And then there is the one with no answer at all. For more than 60 years, beginning around 1949, an unidentified figure appeared at the grave of Edgar Allan Poe in Baltimore every January 19th, the anniversary of his birth. The visitor arrived before dawn, dressed in black, left 3 red roses and a half bottle of French cognac at the base of the headstone, and disappeared without ever being clearly identified. Poe scholars and researchers documented the tradition across several decades. The identity of the visitor was never established despite years of watching. In 2009, the figure did not appear. No explanation was given. No contact was made with any of the researchers who had spent years observing. The visits have not resumed since. Nobody knows who it was, what the tradition meant, or why, after 60 years, it simply stopped. Subscribe if you want more of these. there are more where this came from.